Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Humane Podcast, your tech insider podcast on the data economy. From the physical circuit chips on your smartphone to the software powering GPT models, we live in a data-first world. Humane interviews the founders, investors, executives, and tech leaders that are creating the world that we live in for consumers and enterprises. Hello, listeners, and welcome back to yet another episode of Humane Podcasts, the tech insider podcast on the data economy. From the physical circuit chips on your smartphone to the software powering GPT models, we live in a data world. Humane interviews the founders, investors, executives, and leaders that are creating the world that we live in for consumers and enterprise. Today, I'm excited to present to you Kit Merker, who's the CEO of Plainsight Technologies. Kit is based in the greater Northwest Peninsula and has a rich career working at both big tech companies and startups. Kit, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Great to be with you, David.
Awesome. So, Kit, if you would, before we get started, we have a rich shared history. Both you and I spent some time at Google, and you've worked at both big tech and startups. We'd love to hear your journey about your early career and what led you during that journey to now being the CEO of Plainsight.
Well, yeah, it's I guess a longer history than I'd like to admit. I've been in the tech space and software for over 20 years, and I started out as a software tester and a software engineer. Started writing code when I was a kid. Actually, it's funny because I tried to build a multi-layer neural network with backpropagation training when I was a teenager, and I was trying to do image recognition, and of course, we didn't have the computing power and we didn't have the techniques that we have today. So we didn't get very far. Let me put it that way. But I tried, to build something like that back then, and it's cool to now kind of reconnect the circle. But I worked at Microsoft for a long time. I worked at Google as a product manager for Kubernetes, which we're having our 10-year anniversary of that. I was on the early team there. A couple startups, and I've focused mostly on developer tools, on DevOps tools, on cloud computing. These have been most of the areas I've worked in professionally. And now with Plainsight, what we're doing is kind of bringing a lot of the kind of developer experience and DevOps tools, continuous software updates, and those kinds of approaches to computer vision and artificial intelligence. So, when I think about Plainsight, we kind of almost jokingly say that we turn cameras into spreadsheets. That's kind of our mission. We take cameras and we extract data using this concept of a filter, which is really an app for computer vision. And then we stick that data into ERP systems like SAP or NetSuite, or into analytics systems. So you can have BI dashboards for various things you're looking at. And so that concept of having a computer vision app, we use Docker and Kubernetes for the runtime. And the idea is to kind of almost have like an app store where we can have this set of applications that know how to pay attention to various objects in the physical world that we care about, whether that's cars or people or solar panels or mushrooms or cattle. There's many different types of objects that we're detecting, counting, weighing visually, or analyzing or looking for defects. And we convert those into rows of data that we can stick into downstream systems. So that mission now, I'm very excited by what we've been able to build in that. And it really brings together a lot of things that I've gotten to work on over the years in these various roles. But the big one is kind of bringing together AI and DevOps. To me, this is like a very exciting space to be in right now.
And there's been so much change in DevOps, I think, the last few years as we've been moving into more managed service and managing infrastructure. As you shared, Kit, you have a tremendous wealth of experience being early in the Kubernetes team, both from the Google ecosystem and the open source ecosystem. Would you share with us a little bit about what it's meant to you to be part of that and what's coming up for you as Kubernetes is now celebrating this 10-year anniversary?
The birthday, I think it's officially on June 6th, is the 10-year anniversary of when we announced Kubernetes. It's an amazing journey that it's had. I mean, when I joined the team early on in 2014 at Google, I was tasked with making it ubiquitous. And that was a very crazy goal. And I think I had a small part in achieving it. I think it would be difficult to say it's not ubiquitous at this point in the cloud computing space. So it's very exciting. And looking back on the 10 years, I never expected that it would be at this level of success. And, I'm just very proud of what we did. I think the biggest thing that made Kubernetes different was the people and the community, the number of people that kind of were included. I jokingly tell people that the hardest part about being a product manager for Kubernetes at Google was convincing people that it wasn't a Google product. And once we, took it and gave it to donated it to the Cloud Native Computing Foundation and made it more of a public resource in the open source community, I think it really changed the trajectory of the project. And, careers and companies were built on Kubernetes at a level that I really didn't expect. And none of us, we maybe dreamed that it would become important, but not that it would become this level of project. So anyway, it's a very emotional, kind of feeling about the people and the results that we got from that project.
It's incredible. Something I want to double click on that you mentioned about the growth of Kubernetes. So we've seen a lot of very successful open source projects start in the ecosystem of big tech players like Microsoft, Google, Meta, Amazon. And you've seen both sides of the table. What's your take on, why it's important for researchers and developers at big tech to like have that 20% time to contribute, build out, and then ultimately gift the contributions to the community? It sounds like perhaps you're a big supporter of open source.
I am a big supporter of open source. I would say that I also, put open source in the context of the broader technology economy. I think there's a place for commercial and for open source, and finding that right balance is important. There are some people who I think lean too far either direction, which is, it's hard. It's hard to find that. The 20% time comment, I think, is really important to understand too. Actually a huge believer in side projects and serendipity and trying to find innovation in interesting places. And a lot of times I've found that invention, does lead to innovation that can turn into products and generate a lot of value. So I like to push for that. I also think there's places for things where you maybe not commercially viable, but are just a general good to exist. So, for example, our team at Plainsight, we launched a website called wildfirewatch.org. And I kind of call this our 20% project. Basically, what we did is we took the 1,500 plus cameras in Washington State. We have Washington State Department of Transportation has these existing traffic cameras. And we thought, well, what if we could build an AI model, and really a filter is what we built, that can detect wildfires on those cameras. So we scan it every 5 minutes, and we are looking for fires, and we're continuously improving and training the models that we're using to detect the wildfires. We're working with the Department of Natural Resources and other fire agencies to get troves of video and images of real wildfires so we can use that to improve training. We still have some issues still with the headlights and solar, kind of lens flares and sunsets that still trigger false negatives. But our intention is to take this website and the technology behind it, open source it, share it with more people. Personally, I don't think that companies should really make money off of wildfires. I think it's something we all struggle with as a society. And so if we can get more people contributing to that, I think it'll be great. And for our team, this gives them a project where if they want to try out a new piece of technology, or they want to, blow off some steam writing some code, they have a place to do that, and they can use it for testing and other things. So there's benefit to our business. There's a marketing benefit maybe as well, I guess. But the more important thing is to make sure that this technology and helping prevent and detect wildfires quickly, that gets out to the world, and that's not duplicated across different teams.
I think it's so fascinating what you're explaining, both in the open source context of like 20% projects and supporting the community, in addition to the work you did with Kubernetes and building out modern systems that can be at scale. And it's so fascinating, even to one of your earlier comments, Kit. I think about you shared at the beginning about like back propagation and these stories. We rewind, 5, 10, 20 years, wherever we are in our technical journeys. And just compute was not there to make companies like Plainsight possible. And it's so incredible to see as the cost of storage and compute have gone down, how now companies like Plainsight are building this incredible technology. Maybe you could share more about what's under the hood and what you guys are building.
Yeah, it's exactly right. I mean, the lack of data. When I was building this stuff, as a teenager in the '90s, I was, it was a 486 computer. It was, I had barely had internet access. I think I had the AOL at the time. So it's really, really a different world we're living in now. In terms of Plainsight's technology, so we have actually, I think, kind of an interesting approach. We built this filter box, which is our Dockerized runtime for filters. It kind of gives you the basic services you need to create a computer vision app. So think like the video inputs, the data outputs, and then lets you host a model and then add application logic on top of that. And you can build that into a Docker image. So it's like taking RTSP feeds or other kinds of video feeds. And then we can mark that video up with boundary boxes and other kinds of visual annotation. And then we export the data in MQTT format. And the idea is that then you can kind of chain these together and think of them as a data pipeline where you take video on one end and then you can chain together these filters on the other side. You end up with quantitative data, put that into a data store of some sort. So it could go into your Google BigQuery or Amazon Redshift or whatever, and then eventually end up on a spreadsheet somewhere or a dashboard, a Tableau or whatever. And in terms of kind of our approach from a commercial perspective, we work with our customers to collect their data, video data. We build AI models for them. We use a combination of techniques for active learning and weights and biases and manual annotation and some automated annotation, et cetera. So we're continuously improving the model. So we have this sort of data model lifecycle that we manage on behalf of our customers. We take full responsibility for that because our end customers tend not to have data science or machine learning teams. So we're sort of productizing that experience of data collection to model tuning and fine tuning. And then in addition to that, we have a software lifecycle. So the models have to exist in an application context. You can't just have a model that sits there. You need to kind of tie it in with a runtime. So we also have this software lifecycle, which includes things like security updates, for example. And people need to manage their software supply chain. And so, that's one thing we look at is, okay, can we push software updates out to our customers to make sure that they're secure when things like, XC happen, for example, there's new vulnerabilities all the time. How do you manage the security updates? And then functional updates too. We're always looking for ways to functionally improve our libraries, to improve the accuracy and functionality of the filters as applications. So the customers end up getting access to a filter repository, and then they're able to use, off-the-shelf models. We do the fine tuning, we handle the training, et cetera. And so what ends up happening is the customer can stick this into their data pipeline. And the theory we have is, they care about the data behind the camera, not so much, they're looking at the thing in front of the camera. So imagine, to try to make it concrete. So imagine you're responsible for, deliveries at 10 different warehouses in the US. And traditionally, you've been keeping that data in your ERP system, maybe it's SAP or NetSuite. And so there's some person on the other side who's filling out paperwork to make sure that data is accurate. Okay, this truck came at this time and delivered this many pallets of whatever widget you're trying to do. And you're sitting in, you're on the data side of this, right? You're managing the inventory, you're trying to get an accurate read. Well, mistakes are happening. And your question's like, well, how are you going to improve the data accuracy when you have people filling out forms and spreadsheets and uploading them into the system? Well, our answer is pretty straightforward. What if we stick a camera at each of those loading bays in each of those 10 facilities? And when the pallets are coming off, we watch it, and we have a filter that knows how to watch those pallets coming off the trucks, and that data goes directly into your ERP system for the shipments, and remove all of the sort of game of telephone between the people filling out paper or even electronic forms at each of those locations, and just kind of cut out the middleman, so to speak, get the data directly off the camera. So that's the idea. And as we're building out more and more of those filter applications, we're kind of solving the attention problem of computer vision, because we've seen a lot of demos where you have descriptive kind of analytics where it's like, okay, I see a duck and I see a this and I see a that, and it's kind of describing. The goal we have for our software for our customers, though, is not to describe in this sort of abstract or prose, right? It's like we want to have data. We want to have JSON snippets coming off this that can go into a time series database, then can be added to reports or to tracking, solves a real business need and gives that visibility from what's happening sort of on the ground, and pulling that ground truth into the corporate side where these businesses need to have accurate reports for earnings and for other planning purposes, for resource planning, et cetera. And that's kind of where we fit into the ecosystem. I think we have a kind of a unique approach from that angle. As the feedback we've gotten is that trying to solve this particular problem is somewhat unique, because many of the computer vision companies that we see in the market are trying to solve, quote unquote, harder problems of, self-driving cars and things like that. We're just not particularly interested in that. I want to just kind of look at it as a quantitative data from inside the field of view into these business systems people already care about the data on. I think that's an interesting business to be in. We can help a lot of people.
I think what's so interesting about this line of business is also now we're having sensors and cameras everywhere in the world because they're that much, well, cheaper to produce. They're able to be connected through battery, wirelessly on 4G and 5G and satellites. So we're going to probably get to a point in the next few years where there's a scale factor of even 10x amount of cameras that are around today. But these cameras by themselves are not smart. They can see, and unless you build a system, it sounds like what Plainsight's doing to run the end to end infrastructure, data, pipeline movements, gathering, and then insights. That's where it truly becomes important, right? What are the insights you can extract, and how can that impact the business drivers as well?
Yeah, it's a great point. So the number of cameras is increasing. You're right. All the cost of these things are going down, and people are installing them. And there's I think kind of a hardware software problem that exists in any of these types of solutions. You have these fundamental trade-offs between, burning stuff onto chips that are installed in the hardware. You always have space constraints, and there's, so kind of like a how do I update it and how do I manage how much compute power do I really get versus software, which generally runs on, kind of general purpose computing solutions, whether it's edge or cloud, but you have kind of this fundamental trade-off. And I think as the cameras, the number of cameras or sensors increase, and by the way, we can work with like a variety of different cameras and sensors and LiDAR and all infrared, et cetera. But you almost want to decouple the hardware from the software, but ideally without losing the power. And what we're seeing is that some of these smart cameras that are existing, that are coming into the market, have kind of pre-built, almost consumerish type of things. So maybe it has like face blurring built in, or it's got license plate detection built in, but it can't, measure other factors that maybe you didn't imagine or are not, general purpose problems. Like if you're manufacturing a very specific type of material, or maybe you have very specific, lighting conditions or other things that require fine tuning, you may not be able to do that on the camera. And so there is this kind of interesting architectural question around, what do you push to the consumer kind of edge hardware? What camera quality do you need in order to solve the task at hand? We've seen a lot of situations where people think they can use their existing cameras. They end up with too much motion blur, for example, to do quality control on a moving product. There's a variety of different trade-offs here. So that is one of the challenges, I think, that requires some serious attention for customers who are trying to get value out of their cameras. And oftentimes what we hear are ideas that are, it's like, well, we have these cameras, we should do some AI with it, but it doesn't necessarily tie to a business priority. And those are the kinds of projects that I stay away from. We want to, basically solve these very specific types of situations. And then we do spend a lot of time consulting on kind of like, well, what hardware should you buy and what's the architecture for edge computing and hardware for cameras and focal lengths and all this other stuff, because the world of optics is quite complex. And if we can get a good feed in from it, then we should be able to take that data and use it to produce super accurate counts that are often, in fact, usually more accurate than what a human could do. We've had, everything from like fish under dams that we need to count. And there's like the before was, okay, we got three people watching the video on 3x speed trying to count all the fish. And you just cannot get people to do this stuff. You got to like, pay them a lot, and it's tedious and terrible work. So, the computer vision solution for that is awesome by comparison. So that's where we've really seen an advantage. It's like we're not taking the jobs that people want. It's like taking off the tedious counting and measuring and quality control tasks. They were not good for humans anyway.
So you bring up an interesting point that I've spoken a lot about on the show is about like where are we going in ethical AI and the directionality of technology with humans and jobs. And I kind of see the world going in one of three directions. And I'd be curious to hear your take as well, Kit. So like number one, humans only, right? We're going to do everything as we're doing manually, understanding, moving throughout the fields, gathering all the data. Number two, humans and co-pilots, right? So I think 2023 was the year of the rise of the co-pilots, where we have some assistance, some support. Maybe the human does the oversight. Maybe the co-pilot, accelerates productivity by 20%, 80%, 300%. Or approach number three, which is AI agents, right? So we're starting to see the early innings in mid 2024 about like AI agents and swarm of agents and creating these like virtual personas that could do some of that work, either with machines, maybe the rise of robots, or maybe by themselves. Curious to see if you have any general thesis or approach on what we're seeing.
Well, I think we're probably gonna. I mean, obviously, number one's not going to happen. We're already past the point of humans only, unless we take a significant step back. I think that the distinction between copilot and agent, in some ways, is in degree and not a difference in kind, so to speak. And I think the evolution to that is going to be dictated in some way by the pace of the technology. And I think one of the big questions is like, has GPT and generative AI LLMs, does this have, has it sort of peaked, or is there really another level that it can get to? I think is one question. And will we find sort of the value and the business applications of these things? And I kind of like, we can talk about where we think the future is going for society. When I think about my business, I take a kind of a different tact because I don't want to be dependent on that level of unknown. So I call it the Nintendo strategy, because while everybody else, the Xboxes and PlayStations of the world are going to fight over the highest graphics. This is metaphorical, by the way, but as those kinds of companies are trying to fight over who's got the best graphics and the fastest processing and everything else, our strategy at Plainsight is to take tried and true technology and solve real business problems with it, just like kind of Nintendo's approach of using previous generation hardware, but creating games for an underserved community that people love. It's kind of the same thing for us. We're trying to take this strategy where we can take what works now, and in fact is even kind of old fashioned, quote unquote, good old AI, and as opposed to having to be on the cutting edge of the generative AI and all the power concerns around the hottest chips and all these other things that are really driving the cutting edge. So for me personally, I use AI for a variety of tasks, but generally speaking, they're on tasks that I don't think replaced my humanity. Like I use Grammarly, for example, which to me is like a really powerful tool and I love it, but I don't use chat GPT to write my emails for me. So there are places where I will use AI and places where I personally won't. I think in general technology marches forward and the economy figures out how to do it, and there'll be displacement and there'll be labor changes, et cetera. I think anybody who's thinking about a career, is what I tell my kids too, as they're thinking about their career, they should really think about how AI might impact their career for the positive and the negative, and they should understand what that would look like. And I think some of the professions, there are some professions that may be highly disrupted, as we would expect, and it probably isn't going to be exactly what we thought. So I don't know. It's kind of an interesting to think about the future in this way. But for me as a business leader, I feel confident that what we're doing for the next few years, we're going to keep doing it. So
That's right. It's a good hypothetical, right? A thought exercise. But I think it's always fascinating for our listeners to see on different leaders and what their take is on that shift. And part of that is based on what we're seeing showing up today in working prototypes and demos in the AI industry. We're seeing a
yes.
lot of great, awesome, cutting edge research coming out of startups from Y Combinator and things in the valley. But perhaps there's also been some media about some of these demos not being truly real. Of course, we see in the news about classic things like deep fakes that we've seen over the years about faking someone's audio and video, and this has been going back now, I feel, for like a decade. But now it's starting to happen with startups. Would you have any things to share there as well?
Yeah, well, one thing I want to give a shout out to truemedia.org. I just met the founder of it the other day, and he's doing deepfake detection for political videos, and he's in a race against the clock for the U.S. election. So check out truemedia.org. They're doing great work, and they can use help getting their hands on deepfakes for analysis and training. So that's one thing. On the issue of demos, people have been faking demos in technology since the dawn of time. And there is a certain, fake it till you make it attitude, I think, that's prevalent in startups and in technology. And frankly, I don't like it. I've seen so many places. I'm not going to say that I've risen above ever kind of pre-recording a demo or putting the lasagna in the oven and then pulling out the already cooked lasagna and some demos like that. That's a necessary part of making technology palatable. But when it's like a wholesale fabrication, it doesn't really work. So the way that this has shown up for us at Plainsight is in the scrutiny of customers. And so when we go into a pitch with a customer, they've got a real challenge. what I hear all the time is they've seen so many demonstrations or done proof of concepts, and the results that they see does not live up to the hype. And so there's this extra scrutiny and expectation that they have around what we show them. And so we've had to rise to that challenge. The other big issue, I think, in enterprise AI has to do with data privacy. And one of the big trends we've seen, and this sort of makes sense, is that obviously you need a lot of data to train AI. Like ChatGPT 4 was trained on 300 billion words, right? Like they didn't hire people to type all those words. They got that from the internet, which we all know this, right? And we know that CAPTCHA is taking, pictures of bicycles, and that's how they're training the AI. Well, in the case of business, the companies I talk to, they're trying to gain an edge by adopting artificial intelligence as part of their business process or quality control to improve productivity and to be better than their competition. Doesn't really make sense to buy from a venture backed AI company, give them the data for training, and then let them turn around and sell the model they use that they built off your data to a competitor. And so this is one of the things that I'm, firmly against. And at Plainsight, we've, we've definitely adopted a stance where if a company is giving us their video or image data and we're using it for training, we will not resell that to on the open market to other, to other customers. And we keep that data and the model private for the customers. It's not the most efficient way for us to build models. Obviously, I could build better and higher accuracy models, general purpose models, if I stole everybody's data, but that's not a good way to stay in business. So we've made this promise to our customers. We basically, without having any sort of transparency, control, compensation, we will not take their data and reuse it for other models. And we're making sure that that is enforced across our team. So that's something I think that the two things here, right? One, from an responsible AI ethics perspective in business. So one is like, don't fake the demo. And two is don't steal the data. And that's kind of my stance on it. And that's what we're trying to do to be different.
I think it's so excellent to hear, right, that you're having this focus around being responsible first, because I sit in a lot of meetings with different founders, executives, investors, all over the US and the world. And there's generally two approaches, right? And there's approach number one, which is very much policy driven, is let's figure out how to bring the private and public sectors together. And can we build the right systems, right? So that we are best serving all of our constituents, right? Whether it's politics or you and I as developers. And then there's, what you might say traditionally is the rebellious Silicon Valley approach is build it first, don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness later, right? And in some things that might be noble, right? I'm building and creating new technology, but other parts can get a little bit gray box.
I mean, look, I'm a pragmatist on these things, and innovation, it comes from lots of different places, and every great fortune begins with a great theft, I think is the saying. And so there is something about, leveraging these public resources and turning things, but we should be open-eyed about it. We should be clear-eyed about it. And as a consumer, if you're an enterprise that's choosing their AI strategy right now, it's important to make sure that they're getting a provider that's serving their interests and not becoming the product, so to speak. Because it's the same thing that we went through with the rise of social media, where consumers became the product from an advertising perspective. And we've all accepted this now. This is like not even controversial. It's just the way it is. Businesses should have more control and they have more obligation to their shareholders and to the customers and their employees to make sure that they're behaving and ethically and responsibly with this massive change that's happening in the industry. I think it's important, and I do think everybody should, buyers should beware. I'm not saying Silicon Valley companies are going to change their stance on demos. I just think that people should be aware that not everything they see is real.
That's right. But I can tell our listeners that today's podcast episode is recorded by two real humans with our real human voices. So there's some
That's right.
some reality here. Awesome. Kit, as we're coming up to a wrap here, would you have any call to action or next steps you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, if you want to learn more about what we're building at Plainsight, go to plainsight.ai. We have various Plainsight filters that are on display on our website, and we're happy to talk through what that looks like. If you're a business trying to get data out of your cameras, make spreadsheets out of your cameras, we're here to help, and we make it so you don't need to have an AI or ML team. We can get you going very quickly. So happy to chat about that. I mentioned wildfirewatch.org, and if you're in Washington State in particular, but anywhere, and you're interested in how AI can help detect wildfires, I would say check that out as well. And hopefully I'll see people. I'm going to be at the Kubernetes birthday, June 6th in the Bay Area. And I'm also going to be in Berlin on June 18th for SusaCon. And I'm excited to be a part of that event.
Beautiful. I love all the developer conferences. I think it's so great that we're getting back to in real life post pandemic, and excited to see that 2024 is definitely that year of those experiences. Kit, such a pleasure to have you on the show. Kit Merker, the CEO of Plainsight Technologies. Thanks for joining us on Humane.
Thanks for having me, David.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Humane Podcast. Did the episode measure up to your thoughts on ML and AI, data science, developer tools, and technical education? Share your thoughts with me at humanepodcast.com/contact. Remember to share this episode with a friend, subscribe and leave a review, and listen for more episodes of Humane.